What's up, guys? It's Joey, and we're back for what is this, week 6 now? Oh my gosh. Luke, last week you weren't here. I started off the video by saying we were in week 15. I think I'm officially kind of losing my marbles here. It's going by quicker than I would have hoped. It feels like week 6, almost week 7 already. It's going by too fast. My players are dropping like flies. So that's another conversation that we'll have in a little bit. But before we get started, just want to remind everybody, use code ANALYST on Underdog, and they're going to match your first deposit up to $100. They'll also throw you in a little bonus. So keep that in mind. Now that the promo's out of the way, Luke, let's talk about last night. Let's talk about this game between Seattle and San Francisco. A couple takeaways here. Most of the takeaways I feel like are from the running backs from the San Francisco side. Jordan Mason looking great before he got injured. It looks like it's probably an AC joint sprain, which if we were talking before the episode started, if this was playoffs, this was Super Bowl, he would be right back into that game. Even in the second half, he came back in. It just, it probably just didn't make sense to keep him out there with the other weapons that they have. So understandable. But Luke, what was your takeaway? We were talking about Isaac Guerrero right before this. Is he someone you're interested in picking up? I mean, we know he's got speed, but overall, what's the story with him?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it doesn't seem to be too much of a concern on Jordan Mason. If you're interested on throwing Guerrero, and if you're interested in throwing Guerrero on your bench just in case he misses a week or two, he does appear to be the guy. It is worth noting that he didn't really do much, and then one of his last runs was a 76-yard run. So I think he finished with 10 rushes for just under 100 yards, which means outside of that one big one, he was 9 for 20 something. Now that you can't take away the fact that he's an explosive guy and those 76-yard runs are possible. He did get tackled on the goal line just to give a touchdown to the fullback. But yeah, against teams with less squishy fronts, especially Seattle, who was missing probably 3/4 of their defensive line in this game, really most of the good players on their defensive line, that's a team you could run all over, and the Niners did just that. So I'm not too excited about it, but he's a decent, probably mid-level handcuff for Mason while CMC remains out.
Yeah, and speaking of CMC too, I mean, the latest is that last week, early for me. Last week, Chris McCaffrey practiced in some capacity without a re-aggravation or without pain or discomfort, which is the first time he has done that in a while. So that, first of all, that could mean he could be back in 2-3 weeks time, maybe even less. But this also could just mean that like this week he happened to not have any re-aggravation, and with this kind of injury next week he could very easily have that kind of aggravation again. And he's apparently been dealing with Achilles tendonitis for quite some time prior to the season, so it's just about managing it. And if he did get those injections when he went to Germany, he probably can't come back until late November, early December, because the results or the benefits of those shots wouldn't show up for about 2 to 3 months. So we'll see. But so that's the latest on that. On the flip side, Kenneth Walker over the last 2 weeks, or the last 3 weeks mainly, 21 targets, 8 in each of the last 2 weeks for Kenneth Walker. If you're a Walker owner, this is very, very, very encouraging. He's kind of flipping from they hadn't really used him much in the passing game, but now he seems to be one of their biggest parts of that passing game. So Kenneth Walker being an all-around workhorse, getting the passing work, and being a monster on the ground means he is a bona fide RB1. Luke, how far would you go with Kenneth Walker? Would you call him a top 5 running back with this current volume?
At this rate, probably. You have guys like Isaiah Pacheco hurt. You have guys like Era on Achan who are playing on teams with no quarterback. Who, I mean, we saw it happen to Achan. His production has tanked since Tua got hurt, and now he's hurt himself. Kamara, we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe Spencer Rattler's game plan is just dump the ball in Kamara's hands all game, and he maintains a solid floor. But I can't see him scoring this many points with no real quarterback on that offense as well. So the running back, the state of the running back market is not particularly good now. So guys like Kenneth Walker have this much guaranteed volume. It's hopefully going to be sustainable and hopefully going to continue. And there's really no limits on what I'd say about him if that's the case.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and the point you're making too about injuries and everything right now. It's hard to not imagine Kenneth Walker with this kind of volume to not be a top 5 running back. So to me, I guess we'll just kind of throw that label on him. For the rest of the Seattle offense, I mean, DK had a big touchdown called back. I think it was off a illegal shift or some BS like that. Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think, ended up leading the team in receptions and yards. I don't know if Tyler Lockett just edged him out at the end with that extra touchdown, but Smith and Jigba for most of that game seemed to be the leading receiver. So this is just a situation where every week DK, if he doesn't have his long catches, Smith and Jigma might do some stuff out of the slot, and then just when we don't expect it, Tyler Lockett comes in and catches a touchdown. So it's a messy 3-way kind of race here. But Tyler Lockett right now, I mean, he's also flexible, flexible. I don't know if that's correct term for flexing a player in fantasy football.
I knew
it. Yeah, you got me. You got me. But all right, so we're gonna talk about one thing quick, which is a little bit of an injury recap. I'm not a doctor. We're not gonna go over this and analyze each injury. But what I thought was interesting was, hold on, I have to yawn. Oh, I was going over as many injuries as I could list on this sheet of paper here. And my plan originally was to talk about, the different injuries that we're dealing with and when they're expected back. But I couldn't even get, I started AFC East, I went through the AFC North, and then I couldn't even finish the AFC South without running out of room on this one piece of paper. I don't even have any names on here from the entire NFC. No one from the NFC West. It's like Achane, concussion. Tua, concussion. James Cook, suspected turf toe. Khalil Shakir, ankle. Jalen Warren, knee. Njoku, knee/ankle for David Njoku. Moss, ankle. We got Chase Brown now with a quad injury. Anthony Richardson with oblique. Jonathan Taylor with an ankle. Michael Pittman with a back issue. We got Joe Mixon with an ankle. We got Nico Collins with his hamstring now on IR. Josh Downs also with a toe injury now. Evan Ingram with a hamstring. I can't even get through one division, like 3 divisions. I'm running out of room on this paper. So if you guys are dealing with injuries, it is not your fault. This is just kind of the terrible luck of the draw. I don't think it's been this bad. And Luke, maybe you can help me out here. I don't remember injuries being this bad last year at this pace. I don't know what to even credit that to, whether it's a lack of preseason, whether it's a lack of conditioning. I have no idea, but whatever it is, it's awful. And it just feels like every year the rules are trying to make the game safer, but now we just end up with more injuries on top of that. Like, we're supposed to rule out the hip drop tackle, but that's the reason Joe Mixon hasn't played since week 1.
he's not happy about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be either. I mean, they ruled it out and they didn't even call it during the game. He's been out since week 1 and they literally didn't even make the call. So I digress. But the injuries are a serious issue right now for fantasy football players and for real life football players mainly. So just something to keep in mind. And if you're scrapping to start like all these different people, it's okay because everybody else is in the same boat. And what's funny too is, like, with all the injuries and with all the opportunities it opens up for everybody else, I feel like waivers, this is like the most populated I've seen waivers in a while. I feel like every league that I'm in, my bench is full, and a lot of that is like with guys on IR or guys who are out. And I'm just like, damn, there's like 3 or 4 players right now that I could pick up and like put on this team, and like they would contribute immediately. So it has its benefits, but it's kind of weird.
I'm in multiple leagues where Alex Pierce, who is like the wide receiver, like 15 or something, is on waivers.
Yeah, it's like who can I drop? Like they're coming back, right? Like I don't want to drop anyone that I have. So maybe next year we'll have to do like 5 IR spots in every league or something like that. Okay, so got that out of the way. Now we have the time where we can talk about some of our players going into this week. I'll kick it off with a player that I want to talk about, which is Devonta Smith. So Devonta Smith, he is back from that concussion. He is going up against the Cleveland Browns. And the important thing to note here is that the Eagles have a 26-point implied total. So they're expected to score a good amount of points in this game. Devonta Smith is 6th in targets per route run against single high coverage, and he's 13 in yards per route run against single high coverage. And what's interesting here is the Browns play the most single high coverage out of any team in the entire NFL. So this could easily be one of those games where Devonta Smith over the middle of the field playing out of that slot just ends up being the guy to move the ball in this game. And on top of that, I mean, it's been tough for Jalen Hurts to move the ball without Devonta Smith and AJ Brown. So I think they're going to want to get both of these guys involved immediately. So I'm looking for Devonta Smith to have a relatively big game. But Luke, who's your first player?
My first player is Javonte Williams. Last week, it feels like finally he had a good game. I'm pretty sure Jaleel McLaughlin still scored a touchdown last week, which makes you want to pull your hair out mostly. But Javonte, I believe, also scored last week. He had 6 targets. He had 63% of the snaps, I want to say. It was definitely in the 60s. And I mean, that doesn't sound that great, but when you're playing for Sean Payton and you're a running back, that's pretty damn good. And they weren't really rotating all of these really low end depth pieces. It was really just Javonte and Jaleel on the field. So all signs seem to be pointing up, I hope. I mean, again, it's Sean Payton. But Sean Payton, to give him credit where credit is due, is an excellent play caller. He has been for years. That's why the Broncos paid so much for him when he had been out of the league for a couple of years. And based on last week's usage, I'm excited about Javonte. This week's matchup is against the Chargers. Now, Vegas has the Chargers favored as the away team. I feel like the Broncos are more put together right now. They have definitely the vibes are higher in Denver, for sure. It's a game that is probably going to be close, division rivals, getting it done in the trenches. And I think they're going to have to lean on their best players. And one of Denver's best players is Javonte Williams on offense.
And what's interesting about Javonte Williams, too, he was one of our buy low candidates this past week, right before he had his big game this week. And I say big game relatively to, I think he had like 15 points, which is great for Javonte Williams in this offense. But yeah, he played over 60% of the snaps. He also led the team in target share, which is a very typical Sean Payton kind of thing where the running backs just get a ton of passing work. We saw that with Alvin Kamara, obviously, in New Orleans. And even last year, I think the running backs in Denver had the highest target share percentage out of any other team in the league. So Javonte Williams keeping that going, which is great for his value. And then, on top of that, we're kind of seeing shades of old Javonte. I don't know if you've been able to watch any of the Broncos games, but I've seen some tough running. I saw him hurdle someone, and then I think he got slammed out of bounds last week. But like he's been looking like old Javonte a little bit, which is a great sign as well. Because when you have a rookie quarterback, usually you tend to lean on your running game a little bit more. And if they can do that with Javonte, he can be a huge value going forward. So I like that. I like Javonte a lot. Next player I have who I think is also on the rise is Breece Hall. So the Bills are allowing over 100 yards per game total to running back. So that's not per, just total. And Breece Hall obviously has not been very efficient up to this point. But there are some changes, including Todd Downing now taking over play calling. And if you remember Todd Downing from the classic Derrick Henry Titans days, being the play caller there, you can tell exactly what's going to happen in New York. It's going to be a lot of running. They have 2 great running backs. They have a decent offensive line. So it makes sense. It just makes sense to move this offense through their running backs. The Bills are also allowing the most receptions, receiving yards, and fantasy points to running backs. So this is a get-right game if I've ever seen it. Breece Hall is in a great spot to have I don't want to say breakout, but I wouldn't be surprised if Breece Hall is the running back one at the end of this week. So big fan of Breece Hall coming into that. Luke, who is your second player?
I'm going to be sticking with the Jay Williams here and going with Jameson Williams against the Cowboys. This is a good matchup for the Lions offense, which is absolutely rolling right now. It feels like they're unstoppable at this point. And when this team is really, really going, they're getting these chunk plays to Amon-Ra St. Brown and just moving the ball up the field with both running backs, just kicking you in the teeth play after play after play. And it feels like for a couple of weeks now, that's all the Lions have been doing. And I don't really think the Cowboys defense is in much of a position to stop them. They're banged up themselves and haven't looked all too great the past few weeks. They did play the Steelers last week, so take away from that what you will. But this Lions team is just different. And aside from the matchup, it's just a little bit vibes based, honestly. I have a hunch. And the Cowboys defense is typically prone to the deep play. And all the Lions need to do is that one time. And they tend to like to get Jameson involved when they're kicking said team in the teeth over and over and over again. And it feels like they're on their heels a little bit. They break down for one play and Williams is gone for a 70-yard touchdown. This feels like a spot that's going to happen in.
You know what's interesting too is I'm worried about whoever plays Dallas the following week because I think whoever Dallas, I don't. Yeah, you might be aware of what I'm alluding to here, and I think Chris Long brought it up on his podcast, the Green Light podcast, is the post Lions curse. Have you heard about this?
I have not.
Okay, so every team who plays the Lions the week after sucks. So week 1, the Lions played against the Rams. The following week, they lose to the Cardinals 41-10. Then in week 2, the Lions play against the Buccaneers. And then what happens to the Buccaneers in week 3? They get steamrolled by the Broncos 26-7. The Lions play against the Cardinals. What happens to the Cardinals in week 4? If this will load, I can pull it up. The Cardinals lose to the Commanders 42-14. The Lions play against the Seahawks. And then what happens to the Seahawks? They lose to the Giants the following week. So it's really an interesting kind of idea, like the post-Lions afterburn, so to speak. They play against Dallas this week, so I don't know who Dallas is playing the week after, but a fun little tidbit, if Dallas comes into that game and gets steamrolled, we know why. Funny enough. I don't even know how to explain that, like, actually, but it's very interesting. Moving on to my last player, Bijan Robinson. He's still dominating the snaps in that backfield. We see Tyler Algier getting his share, but Bijan Robinson is still the main guy in that backfield. Do not get that twisted. He's going against the Panthers this week, and similar to Breece Hall, this is a get-right game for Bijan Robinson. The Panthers are allowing the second most yards per game and the most rushing touchdowns per game to opposing running backs, and the second most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, which makes sense because teams get up and then it just turns into running the ball out against them. The Falcons are favored by 6.5 points. So, play calling wise, there should be a ton of opportunity for Bijan Robinson in this game. And the Falcons also have a 27-point implied point total. This could end up being a high-scoring game against the Panthers, who, with Andy Dalton, have been able to put up some points against pretty weak matchups. So I would not be surprised if this turned into a little bit of a high-scoring game. So Bijan Robinson, high-scoring game, terrible run defense. He's got all the opportunity in the world in this matchup. I think this is the point where if you have him and you drafted him as a top 5 overall pick, this is the week where he cashes in. So big fan of Bijan Robinson going into this game. Now, Luke, who is your last player?
I'm going to dog on Kyle Pitts a little bit because what is this account without some dogging on Kyle Pitts every now and then? Just mentioned the matchup against the Panthers. It looks like a great matchup on paper, but this really comes down to last week for me, a week where the Falcons, aside from the first few drives of the game, were really firing on offense for that game. Kirk Cousins threw the ball 50-something times in that game. And somehow, when that offense was rolling, Kyle Pitts was their fifth favorite weapon to use. He was fourth on the team in targets in that game, got out targeted by Ray McLeod, by Darnell Mooney, and by Drake London. You know they want to establish the run game with Robinson as well, who you just said is a great start this week. It doesn't feel like when this offense is rolling, Kyle Pitts is a huge part of the game plan. We saw last week they were kind of trying to force his involvement in the beginning of the game, getting the ball in his hands and trying to have him run with it, throwing him short passes. I think he had 8 targets in that game himself, but at the beginning it felt like he was getting force-fed a little bit, which is, to be fair, what we've all been calling for years now. And it wasn't working. And then, they went to okay, we're losing offense, let's throw the ball deep. And Kyle Pitts sort of fell out of favor there. And again, out-targeted by Mooney, by London, and by McLeod. And coming into the year, if you had told anybody who pays attention to fantasy football at all that Kyle Pitts was going to be out-targeted by Ray McLeod, who could even tell that Arthur Smith is gone? It doesn't feel great for Kyle Pitts owners, especially this week, in a matchup that they're probably going to be ahead in and probably won't be throwing the ball 50-something times either.
I always see the meme online. It's like, you can destroy the man, but not the idea. And it's like a picture of Arthur Smith with Raheem Morris. And it's just like he's just doing the same thing that Arthur Smith was doing with Tyler Allgeier's involvement and Kyle Pitts' non-involvement. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only way to get Kyle Pitts points is for Kirk Cousins to throw for over 500 yards. And if he doesn't do that, then you may not be happy with whatever Kyle Pitts gives you that week. So if that's the standard that we're putting for Kyle Pitts to be a relative fantasy player, that's awful, unfortunately. So, all right, that's going to round it up. Thank you guys for checking in. I just want to mention, by the way, this sweater, Fantasy Commish, from our good friend Max Loebs. Met him at the expo. He's got a big TikTok where he posts a lot of great videos in there. So definitely go check that out. I'll leave him in the description. And this is probably one of the comfiest sweaters I've worn in a very long time. It's very good quality. I do want to mention. But yeah, so thank you guys for checking out, and we'll see you next time.